This is The Wealth Puzzle with Michael Mansfield from the Lynn Group. When a part of your financial strategy is out of tune, your long-term goals, your retirement savings, and your legacy can all suffer. With many years of experience in the financial industry, Michael provides his clients and prospects with the information they need regarding Social Security, retirement income planning, wealth management, and much more. Listen in as we address your financial concerns and provide helpful solutions to put you on the path to achieving your retirement goals. And now, here is The Wealth Puzzle with Michael Mansfield.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. This is Mike Mansfield with the Lynn Group here on the Wealth Puzzle show we put on. Wanted to touch base. This is Tuesday, March 4th. We just had the tariffs kick back in this morning, the 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. There's further tariff conversations increasing with China and some other things going on there. And in and of itself, obviously today that puts a lot of angst in the stock market, as it did the first time a month ago when the tariffs were announced and we had a pullback, and then those things seemed to quell out pretty quickly. The month has passed for the delay. The presidency is talking about, the expectations of what these countries were supposed to have done. Doesn't sound like maybe those were met in their eyes, hence the tariffs again. And it'll be interesting to see how these play out. Certainly the conversation on the street in the investment world, I read a lot of articles and see a lot of things. I was just reading this morning from a large hedge fund saying that they just view all of this as negotiating chips. They don't look this as long-term. If that's the case, then it probably also means that, whatever's going on here will quell out soon enough. But as is life, we shall see. What we can see on the chart, I know it's kind of small, but obviously the market's had a pretty big pullback. It hit a high of about 6,100. It's now down to 5,800. It's interesting. Number one, if you look at this little chart, this is a year-long chart, and one way or another, the stock market is still significantly higher from where it was a year ago. It tends to pull back. This is the healthiest pullback we've now had in certainly the last 12 months. At the moment, it pulled back to the 200-day moving average. This only represents at the moment a 6% drawdown from the peak. And that's interesting because as investors, we don't want the stock market to go down, right? Emotionally, we don't want the markets to go down. It feels very good and warm and fluffy when it just keeps going up and our accounts are growing and things are feeling like they're doing really well. But the stock market is like a heartbeat. It is a creature of habit. It goes up and it goes down. Even in this little chart I have on the screen here, obviously it's had some up and downs. That's what it does. It kind of leapfrogs along the way. The stock market historically has a 10% pullback on average, roughly every 18 months, since it's been going on average. And it's been, 2.5 years since we've had a pullback of 10% or more. And so even though this stinks, even though we don't like it, even though this is unpleasant in the moment, the reality is what's happening here is in part kind of healthy. We need the market to take a pause. We need it to consolidate. We need these little pullbacks to happen. And this is only a 6%. If we were really looking at a genuine, nice 10% little correction, we would want to see the S&P come down to about 5,500, reset the clock, and then find new highs. The problem is we're living in a headwind at the moment of a number of things. So high level, and I've already talked about this on the videos before. On a high level, some of the things that we're certainly focused on, and I'll touch on the Fed in a second, but it's really Congress, right? A week or two ago, the House actually passed phase one of having a conversation about creating a continuing resolution bill, in part to address taxes in this country. Remember, your taxes are going up next January, and so the administration is trying to lock in those tax cuts, make them permanent. On top of that, had some additional benefits that are really positive. Some of my retirees, one of those things potentially being making Social Security federally tax-free. That's entertaining. I just had someone in the office the other day and we projected their tax liability to the feds to be 10 grand this year. And when I removed the taxation on their Social Security component of it, it went from 10 down to 3. And I was like, wow, that would be a pretty strong benefit for those individuals. So those are things that are certainly shaping up. And so the stock market as a whole is very curious if Congress can pull that off or not. If Congress pulls it off, that little headwind will certainly become a tailwind as we consider, how those tax policies might positively affect cash flows in our U.S. Economy. On top of that, more current event-y, we're coming up in a week or so on a government shutdown. So there's a headwind that's sitting on us at the moment. I think it's the 13th of March is the shutdown at the moment. The problem with the shutdown is Congress, I think the Senate needs a 60 vote in order to pass a spending bill in order to keep the government running, which requires bipartisan support. And so that sounds like that's going to be a mess, but certainly a headwind at the moment. But generally speaking, even when we have short-term shutdowns, those right themselves relatively quickly. The other thing that was kind of interesting is the Federal Reserve of Atlanta. They have a website called GDP Now. I have it up here on the screen. It's estimating first quarter GDP to be negative at the moment, 2.8%. This would be the first negative quarterly read in GDP since the beginning of 2022. So it's been a few years. I'm having a little, we'll say, suspicious thought about these numbers. And the reason being is in the anticipation of tariffs, a lot of companies have bought a lot of stuff. They've kind of front run loading up on their inventories and things like that. And imports mathematically negatively count against GDP numbers. And so I'm curious, once the data comes out in a month or two, how much of this is really about that? Is this number artificially low simply because people were trying to beat the tariffs kind of a thing and bought a bunch of stuff and now they just have their shelves full of extra inventory? We don't know quite yet. Obviously, that will shake out relatively quickly. The other thing, obviously, is everybody on earth knows there's continuing geopolitical drama going on. The issue with Ukraine and Russia, people were hoping would have quelled a lot quicker since last Friday. I think one way or another there is a end coming to all of that, but unfortunately the light at the end of the tunnel is a little dimmer at the moment. So we'll see how that plays out. So those are the big ticket items, but I mentioned a minute ago I wanted to touch on the Fed. So the Federal Reserve, part of why the stock market stalled out, if we go back, and once again, I know the chart's kind of hard to see here, but if I draw this blue line across the top, last December, the Federal Reserve came out mid-December and kind of stymied a lot of things. They came out and said, hey, we had promised that we were going to do 4 rate cuts in 2025. We're now only going to do 2. And what I had told you guys, if you go back and watch some of my videos, is I feel like they're saying one thing, but they feel another way. Remember, our interest on our national debt is $1.1 trillion. Our national credit card bill is almost $40 trillion. The Federal Reserve cannot afford a recession. The Federal Reserve cannot afford deflation. Certainly the federal government also in that remark, because if we have a shrinking tax base, that would be very problematic to have such a massive line item. And so in part, the Federal Reserve, I feel, is constantly looking for an opportunity to cut rates. So they said they might not be able to cut as many rates because inflation was being stickier, but they're looking for any excuse because they need those rates to come down. If they can lower the rates, then the refinancing on our national debt will be more affordable and keep the party going a little longer. And so all of this of what's happening right now, all of these headwinds, all of this drama is making the probability of Fed rate cuts increase pretty dramatically. And so here, if I go to the Fed rate meeting, and I know this is kind of hard to follow on the small screen, but basically a week ago, there was only a 25% chance that the Feds would do a quarter rate cut by May. All of a sudden, that's increased to 45%. So all of a sudden, in just a week, the probability of the Fed cutting just increased dramatically. But as I go through the year and I look at the projections later in the year for Fed rate cut meetings, we've now opened up some new windows where we have a full rate cut on the books for this year again. I mean, in fact, if I go look at a 3/4 point rate cut or more as of September, this is dramatic. I mean, look at taking the Fed funds rate from 4.25 to 3.5. A week ago, there was a 16% probability. Now it's a 34%. To 3.25, a week ago was only a 2% probability. Now it's a 13% probability. Like all of a sudden, everything is shifting towards the Fed is going to be on their white stallion and come to save the world. And so that is an interesting component of all of this, because a long time ago, even though the Fed has always been relevant, they haven't been visually relevant. And they have become very visually relevant to all of us in the last number of years. We are very addicted to the idea of what is the Fed going to do? Because the Fed is large, because they manage a large balance sheet. These are kind of critical thoughts in society. This governs the cheap money, perhaps, of markets and things of that nature. And so what's amazing about that is when you look at interest rates, so the 10-year Treasury is the most bellwether interest rate that we have. This governs mortgages, this governs everything. And it's amazing, if you can see this chart, that all of a sudden in the last week, Treasury rates have collapsed. 10-year Treasury interest rate has gone down dramatically. And the idea here is bond traders, interest rate traders are all front running what they think the Fed's going to do. And so a few months ago, interest rates went straight up because everyone said, oh my gosh, if inflation's not under control, the Feds aren't going to cut. So then the thing went straight up. Now it's going straight down because everyone's saying, oh my gosh, the Fed, who's been looking for an excuse to cut, they might be getting all of their excuses here pretty quickly. And so I think there's a lot to be said. There's a lot that needs to play out. Obviously, we need to be patient and see how this goes. But that's why we're here. We're analyzing the data. We're looking at it. We're staring at it all day long. You know, I always joke with people, I lost all my hair worrying about this for you. And so if you have any questions, thoughts, concerns, please do not hesitate to call the office. That's why we're here. So give us a call, 805-500-7035. You can certainly visit our main website, thelindgroup.com, to get our contact info. But we appreciate, your time. We appreciate you listening to these little videos. But everyone be patient. Everything's going to work out just fine. We'll talk to you soon.